Hi, good evening, Dr. Hanna. Good evening to all the participants. Uh, so this is a very basic presentation for people who might want to start getting into the cath lab for doing endovascular work. And I understand that this might be some cardiologists and some of the trainees who are looking at starting endovascular work even from cardiac surgery. So I think before we get on to the hardware, some important things we need to look at: understanding the patient, the details, what problem the patient has, what your plan might be, the history of the patient, the comorbidities. Is he a diabetic? Is he a hypertensive? Is there any renal failure? So based on that, you can select the contrast that you're going to use and how long the patient is going to be fasting. The current medication. Nowadays, a lot of patients may be on NOACs, and since PTINR is not being monitored, it may be missed quite often. So a history of medication is important. When it comes to safety, patient monitoring, we in our unit typically have an anesthesiologist at the head end monitoring the patient while we are operating. Radiation protection, and I'll have a slide on this subsequently. Then it comes to planning the access, the site of the access. The commonest use is the femoral artery, the common femoral, and the others could be, of course, radial or brachial or axillary, and sometimes the arteries at the ankle, the tibial arteries. We like to use ultrasound for all our vascular accesses. It makes it much, much safer to use. And the type of sheath that you want to use, and we'll discuss the sheaths also later. And important is, after you finish the procedure, is the distal circulation maintained, or has your sheath or intervention caused a problem in distal circulation? It's important to assess. And then closure of the access, whether you're going to do a manual closure or would you use a device. One slide for radiation safety. I think it's important because it's something that you don't feel when you're in the cath lab. And all this would appear only later on, maybe after 5 years, 10 years, you would see the effect of radiation. Always use a wraparound apron. Just a front apron is not adequate. Use a thyroid collar, use radiation protection goggles, use a cap. Avoid getting radiation on hands. Use a dosimeter and make sure that you remain within the maximum permissible dose. Keep the detector close to the patient so the scattering is minimized. Use collimation so that less radiation is there. Use a movable lead skirt at the table so that again you are protected. Use an X-ray shield. All these appear a little cumbersome, but I think it's so important that you protect yourself to the maximum. And of course, what Dr. Allen was talking about, using robotics, that itself will probably bring down radiation for the operator subsequently. We also use RADPAD to reduce the radiation scatter. And it's important that people who are not directly operating should stay far from the tube, because the further you are, the lesser the radiation. And again, before going to hardware, I think software is important. The operator must have the right attitude and temperament. Safety for self, for staff, for patient, extremely important, whether it is radiation related or procedure related. Material use should be optimized, should not be extravagant, should not be stingy. So if you have a wire which has been used 30 times, you're going to have trouble getting your catheter or balloon over it. If you are struggling, call for help, because for an interventionist, ego can be your biggest enemy. So I'll deal with the basic hardware, starting from sheets going on to the closure devices. There are some advanced devices like thrombectomy, atherectomy, crossing devices, and all these I will not be discussing. This is beyond the scope of this presentation. So sheaths are used to provide access to the vessel to approach the target area, and these help us in avoiding trauma to the vessel, prevents bleeding and hematoma, and these are all color-coded. These can be short, long, braided, which do not get compressed, can be crossover sheets to go across the femoral bifurcation. These can be micro sheets, which we use for tibial punctures, or steerable tips. At times we've used these for saccular aneurysms for device placement, where the tip can be maneuvered. Important when you're passing it, we use the Seldinger technique. Do not pull back the wire. So reverse pulling of the wire can cut the wire at the bevel. Place the sheath which is closer to the skin, so that if it is at an acute angle like this, it can keep hitting the posterior wall of the artery and cause a dissection. So these are the color codes, and once you start using them frequently, you will easily recognize what color is what French. Important parts, this is the flushing port. It's important to keep the sheath flushed, keep it free of air, keep it free of blood. Always use the dilator. Always use the dilator to introduce the sheath. Never push the sheath directly over the wire. So typical sheath that we use for access is a 10 centimeter length sheath. A crossover sheath would be typically 45 centimeters. If you're going from the brachial artery and want to cannulate the viscerals or go to the iliacs, probably 70 centimeters. From femoral to the carotids, I of course don't do carotid interventions. It's about 90 centimeters. Use the appropriate length. Do not use a longer length than you require, because the longer the sheath that you have outside the body, that would mean you need longer hardware, that is longer catheters and longer balloons. So this is what a crossover sheath would look like. So you have a typically stiff wire going across the bifurcation, and then you pass it along with the dilator. And then you pull out the dilator and the sheath can remain in place. Important thing is that once the procedure is over, pull the sheath back, replace it with a regular short sheath before you use a closure device or you decide to do manual compression. Moving on to guide wires. These can be access guide wires or the J-tip short wire, which is used along with the sheath to place the sheath in place. Then we have the maneuverable or the steerable wires, which can be a straight tip, angle tip, or even J-tips. These are used to subselect vessels or cross lesions. And since these are hydrophilic, we always keep them wet. The tips are always floppy. Then we have the rail wires, which are stiff wires and provide a platform for exchange of catheters, balloons, stents, etc. And we typically use a J-tip for these. When you are passing wires, it's important that you use an introducer to avoid wasting time and causing blood loss through the catheter. Such J-tip wires do not easily go through the catheter hub. This is what we call, this is the torquer, and these can be used to steer the tip of the wire to enter into the selected vessel. The size of the wire is measured in inches. 035 is what we commonly use for most angiograms and interventions when it comes to peripheral vascular procedures. And of course, 018 and 014 can be used for carotid, renals, and below the knee lesions. And 038 is very uncommonly used, especially for large sheaths and aortic endografts. What is the ideal length of a wire in a given situation? You use the length from the insertion to the target, plus the length of the catheter or the device, and add another 10 to 15 centimeters, which can be beyond the lesion. Guide wires available lengths of 120 to 360 centimeters. Some examples, the list is actually very large, but just to give an example, we have for 018, we have the glide wire, we have B18, in 014, we have the B14, and then the non-hydrophilic or the stiffer wires, we have the nitrix and the coke wires. 035, we commonly use the glide wire, and the stiff glide wire or the roadrunner, these are also hydrophilic. And the non-hydrophilic, we have the Rosen wire, Amplatz, which is a stiff wire, and Lunderquist, which is a super stiff wire, which we typically use for endovascular grafts, that is for EVAR and TBAR. Moving on to vascular catheters, we have the flush catheters, which are used for diagnostic angiograms. These have multiple side holes, no recoil, and the tip is usually rounded. Typically, what all of you would have seen is the pigtail catheter. So you avoid entry into a branch and you keep the shaft in the center. Then we have selective catheters, which could be guide catheters or diagnostic catheters. Guides have typically thinner shaft and a larger internal diameter, and they are non-tapering and more reinforced. These can be used for selective cannulation of the vessel, whether you want to get into the renals or the carotids, or you want to get into the visceral arteries. These should have rotational stiffness so that when you rotate the hub, the catheter tip should move and should be flexible enough to advance into the vessel. And then we have microcatheters, which are 2 to 3 French, and these usually fit into a standard catheter. Just to understand the parts of the catheter, we have the catheter tip, and as the tip length increases, it offers more stability in the target vessel, but maneuverability comes down. So we just need to use the right length of the tip. Then we have what we call the primary curve. And this is the angle, this is dependent on the angle of the vessel, and I'll show you that subsequently. And then we have the secondary curve, and this depends on the width of the major parent vessel, and the tertiary curve, and this is the normal curvature of the vessel path, and then of course catheter lengths typically come in 100 to 110 centimeters. And for radial access, when we use some of the catheters can be available in longer lengths. I was talking about the primary curve. So you have angle catheter. So when you have an angle like this, you use a lesser primary curve. When the angle is more, between 60 and 120, then you use a more angulated primary curve, and then the Simmons catheter when the angle is acute. These are some examples of catheters. I commonly use the JR4 or the right coronary catheter. It's a very, very versatile catheter and can be used for most arteries. And then we have the MPA. So it's between these two catheters that we are able to manage most of the procedures. And then we have the glide catheter, which comes in various shapes. This is again a very hydrophilic catheter and very easily glides into. So if we are using going through CTOs, very easy to glide through them. And finally, in the catheters, we have the microcatheters and the support catheters. These, as I mentioned, are 3 French or smaller outer diameter, and they will fit coaxially into an angiographic catheter. These are designed to enter small or tortuous vessels. These can be used for embolizations and for tibial arteries. The Procreate is what we typically use for embolizations, and support catheters like the CXI and Rubicon is what I prefer to use for the tibial arteries. These catheters are available in 3 different diameters, compatible with 014, 018, and 03 guide wires. So, for example, if we look at the Rubicon catheter, this is not the Rubicon catheter, but just to show that this area would be transparent and you would be able to see flow of blood, and the distal part of the catheter is all hydrophilic. Moving on to what many of us would like to do, start doing angioplasties. So we use what we call angioplasty balloons. These can be of various types. Non-compliant balloons, these operate typically under high pressure. These are made of polyester or nylon, and balloon expands to a specified diameter. So these we would use typically in venous diseases, say post-thrombotic syndrome in the iliac vein, or central venous thrombosis in patients with hemodialysis where the brachiocephalic vein is occluded. These typically require high pressure balloons. Or if we are doing a fistuloplasty for a stenosis in the cephalic vein. Then we have semi-compliant balloons. These are made of polyurethane and used where mid to high pressures are required. And these are typically used for most arterial angioplasties. And these are sort of easier to deliver. Then we have the compliant balloons. These are elastomeric, made of polyurethane or silicone, and are inflated by volume rather than pressure. So if you are doing placing a stent graft for aneurysm, and then you inflate a large diameter balloon to touch up the stent graft so that it fits well, these are the compliant balloons. These are also used for occlusion of aorta in emergencies where there is a bleed or trauma, and you want to occlude the aorta percutaneously while you stabilize the patient. Other than that, we have cutting balloons which can be used for tough lesions or at times venous lesions which are fibrotic. Then we have the drug-coated balloons, and then we have the intravascular lithotripsy balloons. So this is an example of a non-compliant balloon which you sort of inflates uniformly, and then the compliant balloon where you are always able to see a good waist, cutting balloon where you have blades here, and always use an end deflator to expand the balloon. It's important to know what pressure you have reached because every balloon has what we call a nominal pressure and a burst pressure. Nominal pressure is what you must reach so that the balloon reaches the specified diameter. And the burst pressure is always higher than nominal pressure. And it is that pressure which if you exceed, there are chances that the balloon might rupture. Then there are different types of catheters which are used for balloons. This is what is over the wire catheter. So in this, the balloon catheter has a guide wire that tracks over the entire length of the catheter. So you have the guide wire coming out of the tip and the hub here. And what started off in coronary interventions and now we use in peripheral also is what we call the monorail or the rapid exchange catheter. So the guide wire enters somewhere along the catheter, and this area that the guide wire goes through is usually around 25 centimeters. The exchange can be done far more rapidly than the over the wire catheter. And these are usually available in O14 systems. And then sometimes we have the fixed catheter where the wire core is built into the catheter and you do not remove the wire at all. And then once we do the angioplasty, we would like to place a stent in many situations. So there are different types of stents available, self-expanding, which are more flexible and longer length. Precise placement at times can be difficult because sometimes they do jump, but as delivery systems are becoming more stable, we are finding it easier to deploy them in a better way. And then we have balloon mounted stents where the placement is very, very precise. They have high radial strength, but of course I would not like to use them across the joint. Then covered stents, these offer good patency, but however they cover the collaterals. And so if the stent gets occluded, the patient is not going to have any collaterals as a backup. In case of a vessel injury, as sometimes might be seen in external iliac or common iliac artery angioplasty, these are a very good backup. These should be part of what I would call an emergency kit, which should be in the operating suite or the cath lab. So this emergency kit should consist of sheets, stiff wire, occlusion balloon, and of course, 2 or 3 varieties of covered stents, which can be placed in emergency in case the artery ruptures during your intervention. So this is mandatory, that should be present in the cath lab. And of course, we use covered stents, the smaller ones, for the peripheral aneurysms too. So this is an example of a covered stent. As you can see, this is very, very flexible. And these are usually made of nitinol and have thermal memory, and they reach full expansion at the normal body temperature. The delivery system appears very complex, but in practice it is very easy to deploy. The stents are between an outer and an inner sheath, and the mechanism is that as you are deploying, the outer sheath moves backwards. It's important that you do not hold the sheath while deploying to avoid shortening or lengthening of the stent. Most of them have some sort of a lever, either a gun mechanism or a wheel, which you can keep rotating, and the stent will keep deploying slowly. Effectively, all of them have what we call a pull-back mechanism. And each one of them will have a safety lock, which you should remove before you deploy. And this should be kept in place till you're ready so that there is no accidental deployment of the stent. And the balloon-mounted stents, as the name suggests, are mounted over a balloon, and these can be deployed fairly precisely. And these generally would use a larger sheath compared to a self-expanding stent. And then these are the covered stents, and I mentioned where we can use them in peripheral aneurysms or a salvage situation. And now we are suggesting use of covered stents even in patients who may have cephalic heart stenosis in patients with arteriovenous fistulas. Another important thing that should be in the armamentarium, even of the beginner, is a snare. It can be used to catch a guide wire if you're using the body floss technique for a brachiocephalic vein angioplasty, or during an EVAR sometimes you have, or even at times for aortoiliac occlusions. So you have a guide wire going from the brachial down to the femoral artery, and snares can be used to catch the wire and bring them out. They can be used to retrieve foreign body, and sometimes when we are using the old catheters or wires, if they break or they get stuck, the snares can be used to take them out. And of course, they're also useful for retrieval of IVC filters. And finally, moving on to closure devices. The way we close the arterial puncture after we remove the sheath, there are various ways to do it. The simplest and the commonest use is manual compression. For this, it's important that we reverse the anticoagulation or wait for the effect of heparin to come down. APTT should be less than 170 seconds. And a ballpark figure is 3 minutes of compression per French of sheath. But typically it takes 10 to 15 minutes of good compression. During compression, the aim is to occlude the puncture in the artery and not the artery completely. The distal pulse, it should be palpable even while compression is maintained. Then we have passive closure devices which have hemostatic pads and then which contain procoagulant. I have never used these. Then you have compression devices like Femostop and radial, of course, which the cardiologists use very, very frequently when they do transradial procedures. And then we have active vascular closure devices like the ProGlide and the Preclose, which use a suture, and AngioSeal, which uses a collagen plug. These are the two that we use in our practice. Advantages of closure device: a rapid hemostasis without interrupting anticoagulation, so you don't need to wait for the effect of anticoagulation to come down. Patients can be mobilized early. Of course, reduced bleeding, reduced risk of pseudoaneurysm or AV fistula, and very convenient in obese patients where it might be difficult to maintain compression. And in restless patients where, again, it is difficult to immobilize the limb after removal of the sheath. Complications can be limb ischemia and infection, and at times, of course, pseudoaneurysms can also form. So these are examples. This is a radial compression, and this is the femostop device where you place the balloon over the puncture, the arterial puncture site, and then inflate the balloon and keep it in place. And here is the Perclose or the ProGlide, which is passed through over a wire once the sheath is removed. And then it has steps listed on terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, and you follow these steps and it sutures the puncture in the artery. And if you can use more than one device, in which case you place the wire, place the sutures before starting the procedure. If you have a large sheath, more than 8 French, or if you're doing EVARs where you have larger sheaths, then 2 or 3 devices can be placed beforehand. And then once the large sheath is removed, these can be tied down. And then this is a collagen plug which sits on top of the arterial puncture. And this is the other closure device that we use. To summarize, assess the patient properly, assess the disease properly, plan your procedure properly. I think when we are starting, it's important that we personally check that all the hardware is there in the cath lab or the hybrid theater. It becomes very difficult if you find that things are missing and then suddenly people have to start running around or calling the dealer to get something to the cath lab. It wastes a lot of time. I would say always use ultrasound, and I would use it for all punctures. Definitely for obese patients, definitely in the pediatric age group, to have very, very precise punctures. Radiation safety, it cannot be overemphasized. The right attitude in treating the right patient in the right way, and of course, asking for help when it is required. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for such a wonderful presentation on the hardware. This is a difficult topic to present in a very extensive one. For the paucity of time, there are about 17 questions to you, but we will post it to you